Okay, so today we're going to work on a little deadlift mobility. With the deadlift mobility, the test, what we'll do is we'll just use a broomstick. If you got a barbell with plates you can set up to the right height, great, but certainly not a requirement. Overall, the theme with this today, recognizing that not everyone is currently busy deadlifting, but just the idea that during this time, we have the opportunity to make larger or more global improvements to our range of motion. And all we need today is a bit of a test. So over this period of time, it would be fantastic if the deadlift is a struggle for your start position to show improvement from before to after via just some basic mobility pieces done with some consistency. So the range we'll work with, so we're gonna go conventional deadlift, take our deadlift grip, and we're just gonna descend and think about the feeling of that position and whether or not like how comfortable it is to get here. Can I get to where the bar would actually be sitting, which is probably just a little bit lower. That starts to feel pretty tight for me. And I can weigh in and sort of feeling not only where I'm feeling tight, but if there's an asymmetry. So right now I'm feeling a little more on that left hamstring. I feel it tight through my right arch, and I can feel it tight up into the high hamstring, tied to the glute. So those are things that might give me direction for what I should do next. That's me. For you, if you feel different things, that can pursue you a different direction. But I'm going to show you a couple pieces that I like for mostly it's actually restoring the range of motion. So thing one, I like the box for rolling hamstrings, adductors, and glutes because I find on the floor I just can't dig in the same way. And that said, the level that we dig in on this really can be determined by what you're doing next. If you're actually going to follow this up with some heavy deadlifting, be thoughtful about how much intensity you put into mobilizing these ranges and then going heavy on. This stuff is maybe a little more appropriate for the 24 hours out, during the rest of the week. Like there's other times where you can improve your deadlift range of motion rather than just directly before you have to deadlift. So just cruising through the hamstring, up nice and high to where it meets the glute. You can roll to the outside a little bit and change that position and angle. You do have to shuffle the roller on the surface depending on what you're rolling on, but just cruising through here for enough time. From there, switching over to adductor. Again, like I said, there's lots of variations and lots of ways to roll this. This is my sort of most favorite. You can also sort of sit on the floor, turn the leg out and side saddle and roll it with a barbell or other heavy pipe or implement. I just find this the easiest to sort of cruise around on and vary the pressure that's being applied to it. Same thing, rolling up nice and sort of high, moving around and just sort of chasing any of those spots. Coming off of there, switching over to ball, and same thing, but cruising through the glutes now with that lacrosse ball, playing around with sort of position and feel on that. You can also, the softball is maybe a little too soft, so you can also set up with a lacrosse ball, the same kind of thing, just chasing and cruising through that, sort of balancing and maintaining control, and just looking for any of those spots that feel like they can use a little more care and attention. From there, moving into a stretch. So I like to roll for a bit before I set up a stretch. I find my tissue pretty tight, and I find it really makes a difference. So I use a hoodie and a bit of strap. I'll use the hoodie to support my back and maintain my position. I'm going to loop the strap under the foot, Set up, other leg is straight, maintaining my low back position, keeping my knee slightly bent, toe pointed back towards the head, and just gently and reasonably pulling back on that, breathing and relaxing into the stretch. And I'm probably going to hang out here for a while, depending on, well, for me it's a while because it's real damn tight. Remember with that one, that especially is one that you probably want to leave for outside of the session. It's not necessarily a piece we want to tag into long, slow, static stretch before we train. Save it for after, or save it for other days. Those are my pieces.
Okay, so a couple of pieces that I'm going to address for deadlift positioning challenges that people have are the first two are actually going to be about the shoulder position, scapula position. Where a lot of people break down in the deadlift is their ability in their setup to maintain a really strong connection between the shoulder and the low back, and so at the moment that they pull a heavy deadlift, they lose that position. So there's a few things mobility wise that can affect your strength in maintaining that position. The first one is actually the bicep, and I think this gets really overlooked with people because if you have shortened biceps for any reason, if there's some sort of lat dysfunction where you're not pulling with your lats properly, but you've defaulted to pulling with your bicep, you probably will have a shortened bicep. It may not show up until you end up in a straight arm position. So if there's only so much range to work with, if your end range is quite short, and then you fully straighten the elbow, there's no choice for that muscle except to lengthen and pull from the shoulder. So what you'll often see is a dumped shoulder position coming from the bicep. So if you know this is something that you deal with, then I would definitely do this every time you do any long arm pulling motion, so cleans or deadlifts, but it's not a bad idea anyways. So very, very simple, pointing thumb down and then rolling through the belly of the tissue. And you can roll right up into the front of the shoulder. Usually I would do this on countertop that's more my height so I can move my feet around a bit more. But I actually would say what's important here is to really look at the lower part of the bicep and the belly of the tissue. That's where a lot of the restrictions show up clinically. When I'm treating biceps, I'm finding a lot of binding happening in that lower part. So pay attention there. The second one that we're going to look at is your serratus anterior. So it's probably not a muscle that we talk about very often, you may not be aware of. It helps move the scapula forward, and so if it's bound up, it's going to make it hard for you to retract. So we do put a lot of care and attention into opening the pec to try and get good retraction, but often that binding is actually happening underneath. So we're not going to be rolling the lat per se here, it's going to be more in front of, and it's a little bit hard to explain, but what you're going to do is you're going to be rolling underneath your armpit, but I want you in front of the bulk of that lat tissue. And your idea as you roll is you're actually going to be trying to push that whole mound of tissue off the ribs. So be careful how much pressure you put on here because you are going to be on the ribs. It can be a little bit more tender. But get right up underneath the armpit. Instead of aiming for the meaty part like you most often would do, I want you to get just in front of it. And as you roll up and down, apply some body pressure this direction so that you're actually pushing that tissue back. So that hopefully that makes sense. And definitely spend time rolling your lats as well, but that's just another piece to think about if you struggle with keeping the shoulder blades back. So those are the upper body focus ones for today. The other lower one I want to look at is your piriformis. So Jesse went over glutes, and obviously you want to have healthy mobile glutes to be able to get a good pull in your deadlift. But underneath your glute tissue, you have like a band of external rotators which run sideways, and they can get really bound up, and they're quite deep, and they will stop your hip from potentially seating back properly. So If you've got that binding deep in the underneath the glutes, then you may go to set up, but the hip stays forward. And this is really common with people who drive a lot and are tight through the hip flexor. But we want to open that up to create space in there so that the femur can actually go back. So I like to do this one laying on the floor, and then, ooh, it's really sunny. You're gonna have to sort of search around. Like obviously there's gonna be a bunch of places in the glutes that feel really good to roll, but if you go quite low, you're gonna feel this like sausagey like tissue. It's gonna be a thicker band underneath the glutes. Sometimes you can locate it by going down your sacrum really low and then kind of coming off that, because that's the direction it runs. So keeping your feet flat on the floor helps, and then you'll notice it because it does feel different than the rest of the glutes. And when you find that spot, you can hang out there, but you can also just do a little bit of range of motion at the hip to help open it up. And I would say that this one is really important to do if you have a hard time, and this would apply for the squat as well, if you have a really hard time getting your hips back into position, I would spend maybe 30 seconds to a minute doing this before your workout. But certainly spending the time also in the evenings and more of your restorative sessions, trying to get that deeper tissue to let go.